All right, so get this. We're diving deep today into some pretty serious claims about how immigration enforcement worked back during the Obama administration.
Oh, wow.
Our main source. A YouTube video and the guy talking. A former ICE agent, Jeff Perks.
Interesting.
He was an agent from 2008 to 2014.
Right in the thick of it.
Exactly. So he's speaking out now saying that the Obama administration actually made it tougher for ICE to do its job.
Huh. So what's he saying specifically?
Okay, well, he claims that the Obama administration put out these directives that, basically tied ICE agents' hands.
Tied their hands how?
They were told to not arrest undocumented immigrants. And not just any immigrants. He's talking even ones with criminal records.
Seriously?
Yeah, and he points to this law from 1965 that he says clearly gives ICE the authority to make arrests based on it. It's called alienage and removability.
Okay, so what does that mean?
Basically, if someone's here illegally and meets certain criteria, ICE can detain them.
I see.
But Perks is saying that even with this law, they were often told not to do that.
Well, that's interesting because it seems like the 1965 law is the foundation of his whole argument.
Right.
So I think it would be helpful to look closer at that 1965 law to see what it actually says.
Yeah, what exactly were the rules for detaining someone back then?
Exactly. Were there any exceptions or limits built into the law itself?
That's a really good point.
Because, maybe Obama's directives weren't actually breaking the law, just interpreting it differently.
Yeah, the devil's in the details sometimes.
For sure.
Perks goes on to describe this whole culture where agents would get in huge trouble.
Trouble for what?
For making these types of arrests.
Wow.
Like their superiors would give them all hell, he says.
So basically there was this clash between what agents felt was their legal duty and the political climate at the time.
Exactly.
Makes you wonder how that affected ICE morale and how effective they were. Were agents hesitant to enforce the law even when they thought they should?
Good question.
And did this create inconsistencies in how immigration laws were actually applied?
These are all things we need to consider.
Absolutely.
And then Perks just drops this bombshell.
What's that?
He claims that the Obama administration just straight up refused to prosecute undocumented immigrants, even if they had a criminal history.
Whoa, hold on.
Yeah.
This goes against how a lot of people view Obama, doesn't it?
It really does.
A lot of people think he was tough on immigration.
Right.
So if what Perks is saying is true, it makes you wonder why they would have that policy.
Exactly.
Was it on purpose to deprioritize immigration enforcement?
Or were there other things going on, like limited resources maybe?
Yeah, or maybe they wanted to focus on certain types of offenses.
So what are your initial thoughts on all this?
Well, it's important to remember this is just one guy's story.
True.
We have to consider that he might be biased.
Right.
I mean, Perks is openly supportive of Trump's stricter immigration policies.
Is.
And he sees those policies as fixing what he thinks Obama messed up.
Okay, so we have to take that into account. And this is where Lisa Haven, the YouTube host, comes in.
Okay, what does she say?
She adds this personal touch by talking about her own experience.
Oh, yeah.
Legally immigrating her son from Bulgaria.
Interesting.
She compares how strict that process was to what she sees as this really relaxed enforcement under Obama.
I see.
So her story brings in this whole emotional side to the conversation.
Yeah, it shows how frustrated some people are when they see what they think is a disconnect between the legal immigration system and what's happening with undocumented immigration.
For sure. It adds a whole other layer to everything.
It does.
Then Perks goes on to make another pretty serious allegation.
Okay, what is it?
He says that the Obama administration's policies actually helped tuberculosis spread.
What?
Because immigrants weren't being screened properly.
Wow, that's a big claim.
It is.
We need to be careful here and look for evidence beyond just what Perks is saying.
Right.
We need to look at public health data from that time.
Yeah.
Reports from doctors and other sources to see if there's any truth to this.
We can't just take his word for it.
Especially on something this serious.
Right. This is a deep dive, remember, not a blind leap of faith.
Exactly. And that's where the real digging starts.
Yeah, what are the implications of his claims if they're true?
Right. And how does his account fit into the bigger picture of immigration policy and all the political debates around it?
These are the questions we need to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
This is just the tip of the iceberg, isn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
This isn't just about what one former ICE agent is claiming. It's about this much bigger conversation.
I totally agree.
Perk's story makes you think about some really basic questions.
Like what?
Like, how do we balance enforcing immigration laws while still respecting people's rights,
Right.
no matter their immigration status.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, it's this tension that's been at the center of immigration policy debates for forever. And it gets even more complicated when you start thinking about individual agents versus the orders they get from higher-ups.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
If what Perks is saying is true, it means there was this real disconnect
Between
what ICE agents thought they were supposed to do and the policies of the administration they were working under.
Like they were being pulled in two different directions.
Exactly.
Which could totally mess with their morale and how effective they were.
Right.
Like imagine you're an ICE agent out there. You think you have the authority to arrest someone, but then you get reprimanded for it.
That would be so confusing.
Super confusing and frustrating.
Totally.
And it also makes you wonder about consistency.
Like if agents are getting mixed messages, are the immigration laws even being applied the same way everywhere?
Exactly. Or are there inconsistencies based on how individuals interpret the laws or because of political pressures?
That's a really important point.
And it goes back to that idea of prosecutorial discretion. So even if ICE agents arrest someone, it's ultimately up to the prosecutors to decide whether to actually press charges.
Oh, I see.
So if they were hesitant to prosecute undocumented immigrants during the Obama years, that decision probably came from higher up.
From the Justice Department.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's tie this back to what Perks is saying.
Okay.
He's arguing that Trump's stricter immigration policies are totally necessary.
To do what?
To get things back on track.
To
enforce the laws that he thinks were being ignored under Obama.
I see.
And that's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting to me.
How so?
It goes beyond just his claims and looks at what could happen because of them.
Okay. Yeah.
Like if what Perks is saying gets attention and other people start sharing similar stories.
It could change how people view Obama's legacy on immigration.
Exactly.
Wow.
It could also spark even more debate about how much power the president has
in terms of
shaping immigration policy.
Okay.
Like how much leeway does a president have to interpret and enforce existing laws? And where's the line between using their judgment and potentially overstepping their bounds?
These are questions that legal experts and policymakers have been arguing about for years.
And Perks's account just adds another layer of complexity to it all.
Especially with the political climate we have right now.
Yeah, his story could be used by people who want stricter enforcement.
To say
that Obama's approach didn't work or was even dangerous.
That's true.
But then people who want a more lenient approach might say that Perks is exaggerating or taking things out of context.
Right. They might point to other data or evidence that contradicts what he's saying.
Exactly. That's why it's crucial to look at this with a critical eye.
Absolutely.
And examine the evidence from all sides.
We can't just take one piece of the puzzle and ignore everything else.
You're so right. Immigration is such a complicated issue.
It is.
And it's really hard to separate what causes what.
And it's crucial to remember this isn't just some theoretical debate.
It's about real people's lives.
Their families, their futures.
That's such an important point.
It's easy to get caught up in the legal and political stuff. Yeah. But at the end of the day, this is about people.
Absolutely.
And that's why we have to talk about this with empathy and respect, to listen to different points of view and think about all the possible consequences before we form our own opinions.
This whole thing has really made me think about how complex immigration enforcement actually is.
Yeah, it's not simple.
It's easy to just focus on headlines and what politicians are saying. But hearing Perks' story really brings it to life.
It makes it real.
It does, and it shows how important it is to hear from different people with different experiences.
We can't really understand something this complicated if we're only getting one side of the story.
So where do we go from here?
Well, we've looked at Perks' claims and what they might mean.
Right.
And we've talked about how we need to investigate further.
What's the big takeaway for our listeners?
I think the most important thing is to think critically.
Don't just believe everything you hear.
Exactly, even if it's from someone who says they have inside information.
Like Perks.
Yeah, dig deeper, look at different sources, and really think about the evidence.
That's great advice. So how can our listeners do that in this case?
Okay, well, first think about where this information is coming from.
Right.
Perks is obviously coming from a particular point of view.
One that supports stricter immigration enforcement.
Right, so keep that in mind and try to find other sources that might have a different perspective.
Makes sense. What else should they be thinking about?
Well, think about the bigger picture.
Okay.
How do Perks' claims fit in with what you already know about Obama's immigration policies?
Right.
Are there any gaps in your knowledge that you need to fill in?
I like that, encouraging our listeners to be active in their learning.
Yeah, to not just listen, but to really engage with the information and try to get the whole picture.
Exactly. That's where the real learning happens.
When you move beyond just accepting or rejecting what you're told and start asking your own questions.
And coming to your own conclusions. We've covered some pretty intense stuff today,
We have.
but I always want to leave our listeners with something to think about.
To keep the conversation going.
Yeah, like a spark to ignite their curiosity.
I like that.
So what's your final thought?
I think this immigration is really complicated. There's no easy answers.
Yeah.
There are valid points on all sides.
So how should we approach this?
With empathy, with understanding, and with a commitment to finding the truth.
Even when it's difficult or makes us uncomfortable.
Exactly.
Well said, and that's what the deep dive is all about, encouraging curiosity, critical thinking, and helping our listeners dive deeper into the issues that matter.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Thanks for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you next time, ready to explore another fascinating topic.